Get out!
Revenge Files with Nora. File 27. Andrea. The most dangerous person in your career isn't the one who hates you. It's the one who mentors you just enough to know exactly where you're vulnerable. For me, that person was Edmund Holloway, and he sat across from me at the client meeting, the same seat he'd sat in 100 times before, and said my name like he was reading it off a stranger's business card. "I'm sorry," who developed this framework. He turned to the VP of Operations, smiled, and said, "This was a collaborative effort, but the strategic vision came from my experience. 21 people in that room, 7 years of my work, erased in a single sentence." I didn't flinch. I didn't correct him. I folded my hands on the table and let the moment pass like I hadn't noticed, but I had noticed everything. For 3 years, I had been documenting every conversation, every redirected email, every whispered promise that vanished the moment witnesses left the room. Edmund had been my mentor, my advocate, my professional father figure. He had also been systematically positioning himself to absorb everything I ever built while making sure I felt nothing but gratitude for the opportunity. Here's what happens when you finally stop being grateful. My name is Andrea Kensington. I joined Hartwell Partners 7 years ago as a junior analyst with absolutely no idea how consulting actually worked. The office occupied the 31st floor of a glass tower in Midtown, the kind of place where the coffee was always fresh and the expectations were always impossible. Edmund Holloway found me crying in the supply closet during my 3rd week, not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears while I pretended to count legal pads. He handed me a tissue and waited. "First client presentation?" he asked. I nodded. "Did you prepare?" "For 40 hours, I managed." "Then you're ready." He squeezed my shoulder. "The nerves mean you care. That's the part they can't teach." He walked me through the presentation that afternoon. Not the content, I had that memorized, but the performance, where to pause, when to make eye contact, how to handle questions that were really challenges disguised as curiosity. Edmund became my mentor officially 3 months later. He invited me to client dinners, included me in strategy sessions, advocated for me in rooms I didn't have access to yet. "You're going to be better than me someday," he said over celebratory drinks after my first promotion. "I'm not saying that to be nice. I'm saying it because I need you to remember it when things get hard." I believed him completely. Wouldn't you have? But that was my first mistake. Documentation is protection, he told me once during a late preparation session. Every email, every decision, every verbal agreement, write it down. Create a paper trail that speaks when you can't. I took that advice seriously. I created an Obsidian vault for tracking my contributions, organized folders of correspondence, maintained detailed notes. I thought I was learning to protect myself from the corporate world. I didn't realize I was building the evidence that would eventually protect me from him. By my 4th year, I had developed a methodology for operational transformation that was generating real results. Clients were requesting me specifically. The framework I had created was becoming the firm's signature offering. This success was starting to attract quite a bit of attention. Edmund presented it to the partners as our approach. I didn't mind at first. He had guided me, supported me, opened doors. Sharing credit felt like loyalty. The first warning came during a client pitch. I had built the entire proposal, rehearsed every section. Edmund arrived late and smoothly took control. "Let me walk you through our methodology," he said, clicking to my first slide. He presented my work flawlessly. When clients asked questions, he answered with details only someone who had built the framework would know. Afterward, I found him in the hallway. That was my presentation. He looked surprised. We prepared together. "You took over completely." I was adapting to the room. He touched my arm. "Andrea, you seemed nervous. I was trying to help." I hadn't been nervous, but he had reframed the situation before I could object. "The client connected with my delivery," he continued. "That's what matters, right? The win." I thought about what he said. Was he right? Was winning what mattered, and were we winning? I told myself to let it go. I told myself loyalty meant giving people the benefit of the doubt, but the situation became even more obvious over the following months. Edmund began scheduling alignment meetings before every major client interaction. He framed them as collaborative preparation, but I could see they were really about extracting information. He would ask detailed questions about my approach, my recommendations, and the specific language I used, then present my insights in meetings as if they were his own observations, without ever mentioning my name. Raymond Cross, our division head, noticed my visibility decreasing on paper. He called me into his office. The partners are asking why Edmund is carrying more of the client-facing work. I've been focused on methodology development, I said. Important work. He nodded slowly. But remember, invisible work doesn't get promoted, Andrea. I left his office with cold weight settling in my stomach. Edmund had positioned himself as the face of everything I built. The partners saw him presenting, his name on deliverables, his client relationships. They didn't see the 40-hour weeks I spent creating what he delivered. And by now, this situation had reached a point where others were starting to notice too. Edmund was dismissing my requests and undermining every attempt I made to resolve the situation. The daily stress was causing me regular stomach pain. No matter how much I tried to delay or ignore it, I had no other options left. That evening, I pulled out my documentation. Emails where I had proposed ideas that later appeared in his presentations. Meeting notes where he asked me to explain concepts he didn't understand. The evidence was there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I started paying closer attention. I forwarded important emails to my personal account. I sent follow-up summaries after verbal conversations, creating written records. I documented the pattern without knowing what I would do with it. 3 months before the client meeting that changed everything, Edmund invited me to dinner at his apartment. High ceilings, expensive wine, a view of the Hudson. The partners are discussing a new position, he said. Client Solutions Director. It would oversee the entire operational methodology practice. This was the role I had been working toward for years. I want to make sure the right person gets it, he continued. I waited for him to say my name. Instead, he smiled. I think we should position you as my deputy, build your visibility for the next cycle. Deputy. Second place in a race I had been running alone. The methodology is my work, I said carefully. Our work, he corrected. That's the beauty of collaboration. I looked at him and finally saw what I had been avoiding. He wasn't preparing me to succeed. He was preparing me to support his success indefinitely. I didn't let on that I was aware of what he was doing. I'll think about it, I said. Don't think too long. His smile remained warm, but his eyes had sharpened. I took a car home through the city lights. Years of loyalty, years of gratitude, years of believing that working hard and trusting the right people would be enough. The betrayal wasn't a single moment. It was a pattern I had finally allowed myself to recognize. I spent that weekend reviewing everything. Every email chain, every meeting note, every instance where Edmund had stepped over my contributions while smiling like he was doing me a favor. After a sleepless night and the stomach pains that came with it, I walked into the office Monday morning with a decision made. I wouldn't confront Edmund. I wouldn't complain to Raymond. I wouldn't do anything that could be dismissed as emotional or territorial. Instead, I would be strategic. I would let Edmund continue exactly as he had been, while I quietly prepared for the moment when his pattern would become undeniable. Part of me wasn't even sure I had the energy for it, but I had no other choice, and I could see that this was the smartest thing to do. Edmund announced to the partners he was ready to present the Client Solutions Director proposal. He had assembled a deck outlining his methodology, his client relationships, his vision. He asked me to help him prepare. I want your input on the technical sections, he said. You understand the details better than anyone. I smiled and agreed. I gave him everything he needed to present my work convincingly, but this time was different. I did something he never would have expected. I kept copies of our preparation emails. I documented which sections I had written. I noted timestamps of my original files compared to his drafts. The partners scheduled the presentation for a Tuesday afternoon. The room would be full. Edmund was confident and ready to claim the role he believed he deserved. I was ready too, just not in the way he expected. The presentation room was packed. Partners lined one side of the table, senior consultants filled the remaining seats, junior staff stood along the walls. Edmund stood at the front, slides projected behind him, and he was managing to look every bit the leader he wanted everyone to see. The operational transformation methodology represents 7 years of development, he began, and my jaw tightened at the number. That number was my 7 years. 7 years of effort I had poured into this. It has generated measurable results across 12 major client engagements. He clicked through the slides smoothly, the framework overview, the implementation phases, the success metrics. All of it mine, delivered as if he had conceived it during a moment of strategic brilliance. I watched the partners nodding along. Raymond Cross was smiling. The other senior leaders were taking notes. Edmund was selling my work better than I ever could have, and everyone in the room believed it belonged to him. Then came the questions. A partner named Richard Dow leaned forward. The risk mitigation approach you outlined, walk us through the development process. Edmund paused almost imperceptibly. It evolved through client feedback over multiple engagements. Specifically, Richard pressed, "How did you identify the critical intervention points?" I knew the answer. I had spent 3 months developing that system, testing different approaches, documenting which methods worked and why. But Edmund didn't know. He kept confusing the terminology, and he had asked me to explain it to him twice during preparation. The intervention points were mapped against common failure modes, he said, his voice steady but vague. We analyzed patterns across implementations. Richard frowned slightly. "Can you give us an example?" Edmund glanced at me, quick and sharp. A look that said, "Help me," without saying anything at all. The distribution sector engagement, I said calmly. The intervention points were calibrated against their inventory cycle timing. That's where we discovered early-stage disruption yielded better results than late-stage correction. Edmund nodded quickly. Exactly. That's exactly what I meant. Richard had stopped looking at Edmund and was now looking at me. "Andrea, you worked on that engagement directly?" "I led the methodology development for that client," I said. "The framework Edmund is presenting originated from that project." The room shifted. Not dramatically, not with any audible reaction, but the energy changed. Edmund's smile tightened. "Andrea has been instrumental in implementation," Edmund said smoothly, "which is why I'm recommending her as deputy for this initiative." Deputy? There it was again. The ceiling he kept building above my head. Raymond cleared his throat. "Let's continue with the presentation. We can discuss team structure afterward." Edmund recovered his composure and moved through the remaining slides, but I noticed the partners were looking at me differently now. Curious. Reassessing, trying to understand what was really going on. After the presentation, I returned to my desk and found an email waiting from Richard Dow. He wanted to meet privately to discuss the methodology development process. I accepted immediately. The meeting happened 2 days later in Richard's office. He was one of the founding partners, respected for his analytical approach and his low tolerance for politics. If anyone would recognize the pattern I had documented, it was him. "I've been reviewing your contribution history," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Your name appears on the original methodology files. Edmund's doesn't. I chose my words carefully. Edmund has been presenting the work as a collaborative effort. Has it been? As I developed the core framework, Edmund has been instrumental in client relationships and executive communication." Richard leaned back. "That's a diplomatic answer. It's an accurate one." He studied me for a long moment. "I've seen this pattern before. Senior people absorbing junior contributions. It's difficult to address without concrete evidence." I pulled a folder from my bag. "I have documentation." His eyebrows rose. "What kind?" "Email timestamps showing when I proposed key concepts. Meeting notes where I explained methodology elements to Edmund before he presented them. Version histories of files I created that later appeared in his materials with his name on them." Richard took the folder and began flipping through pages. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern to something harder to read. "This is thorough," he said finally. "I learned from Edmund, documentation is protection. I didn't realize I would need to protect myself from him." He closed the folder. "What do you want me to do with this?" "I want you to make an informed decision about the client solutions director role, based on who actually built what you're evaluating. And if that decision doesn't go your way," I met his gaze, "then I'll know this firm values performance over credit, and I'll make my own decisions accordingly." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. Give me a week. I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not hope exactly, more like clarity. I had finally taken a clear stand, and the situation was no longer invisible. The pattern was documented. Whatever happened next, at least one person in power understood what had actually been happening. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. The following week was strange. Edmund continued treating me like his trusted deputy, asking for input, sharing updates, inviting me to preparation meetings. Either he didn't know about my conversation with Richard, or he was pretending not to. I played along. I answered his questions. I contributed to his preparations. I documented everything. Then the complications began. Edmund called an unexpected meeting with our 3 largest clients. He positioned it as a relationship-strengthening initiative, but I recognized the strategy immediately. He was building leverage. If he controlled the client relationships, he controlled the revenue. And revenue was the only language the partners truly understood. I watched him work the room during the first client dinner. He was charming, attentive, strategic in ways I had to admire even while resenting them. The clients responded to his warmth. They asked about his methodology. They praised his insights. By the end of the evening, Edmund had secured verbal commitments for expanded engagements, 3 contracts worth several million in annual revenue, all tied to his relationship management. He found me by the coat check afterward. "That went well," he said, his smile genuine. "The partners are going to be very happy. You're positioning yourself as irreplaceable," I observed. His smile didn't waver. "I'm positioning us as irreplaceable. This helps both of our careers." "Does it?" He tilted his head. "Andrea, I know you're frustrated, but you need to trust the process. Your time is coming." "When?" "When you're ready." He squeezed my arm. "I'm looking out for you, I always have been." I watched him walk to his car and wondered if he actually believed what he was saying. If somewhere in his mind he had convinced himself absorbing my work was mentorship, that keeping me subordinate was protection, that his success and mine were genuinely connected rather than fundamentally opposed. The next morning, I received a calendar invite from Raymond Cross. Partners meeting 3 days away. Subject line, director role discussion. Something was about to happen. I just didn't know yet whether it would be good or catastrophic. I spent those 3 days preparing for every scenario. Best case. Richard had reviewed my documentation and recommended reconsidering the director decision. Worst case. Edmund had discovered my meeting and was preparing to retaliate. I called my sister the night before. She had no patience for corporate politics. "Just tell them what happened," she said. "Edmund has 30 years of relationships. I have 7 years of work and a folder of emails. The emails prove your case. They prove I did the work. They don't prove the partners will care." She was quiet. "What happens if they don't? Then I find somewhere that does." The morning of the partners' meeting, I arrived early. Edmund came next and paused when he saw me. "You weren't on the original invite. Raymond added me this morning." His smile flickered. "Good, you should be part of the conversation." The partners filed in. Richard Dow entered last, carrying my folder. He placed it on the table without comment. Edmund's eyes tracked the folder. His smile disappeared. Raymond called the meeting to order. "We're here to finalize the Client Solutions Director decision. Richard has asked to share some information first." Richard stood, opening my folder. "I've spent the past week reviewing the development history of the operational transformation methodology, the work we've been evaluating for this role." Edmund straightened in his chair. "I'm happy to discuss the methodology. It represents years of dedicated development." "It does," Richard agreed. "The question is, whose years?" The room went quiet. Richard laid out the documents methodically. Email chains showing concept development, file version histories with timestamps, meeting notes documenting who had explained what to whom. He didn't editorialize. He simply presented the evidence and let it speak. "The documentation indicates Andrea Kensington originated the core framework," he said. "The methodology refinements, the client adaptations, the risk mitigation systems, all of it traces back to her work product." Edmund's face had gone pale. "This is a mischaracterization. We developed this collaboratively. The file metadata doesn't support that," Richard replied calmly. "Neither do the email timestamps." Raymond leaned forward. Edmund, you've been presenting this as your creation. I've been presenting it as our practice's creation. Andrea is part of the practice. Her contributions are included in that, but not acknowledged, another partner observed. Not specifically. Edmund turned to me, his expression shifting from defensive to wounded. Andrea, why didn't you come to me directly? We could have discussed this privately. I met his gaze steadily. I tried. Multiple times. You told me to trust the process. I was trying to help you. You were trying to position yourself as irreplaceable by absorbing my work. That's not help. That's extraction. The word landed heavily. Edmund opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. For the first time in 7 years, I watched him struggle to find the right words. Richard continued. Based on this review, I'm recommending we reconsider the director appointment. The methodology that would define this role was developed primarily by Andrea. The partners should factor that into our decision. The discussion that followed lasted 2 hours. Edmund defended himself with skill and conviction. He emphasized his client relationships, his revenue generation, his decades of institutional knowledge. He framed my documentation as jealousy, as territorial behavior, as exactly the kind of thing that demonstrated why I wasn't ready for leadership. But the evidence was there. The timestamps didn't lie. The email chains couldn't be reinterpreted. By the end of the meeting, the partners had reached a preliminary decision. The Client Solutions Director appointment would be delayed pending a full review of contribution history. Both Edmund and I would be evaluated independently. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. In my view, it was an important milestone. Edmund cornered me in the hallway afterward. His composure had cracked, revealing something raw beneath. You went behind my back, he said, his voice low. I documented reality. You presented fiction. I gave you 7 years of mentorship. You gave me 7 years of preparation to support your career. That's not the same thing. His eyes glistened. I thought we were building something together. So did I. Then I realized I was building it alone while you took credit. He stepped back, shaking his head. You'll regret this. The partners will see you as difficult, ambitious, threatening. Maybe, or maybe they'll see me as someone who does excellent work and expects to be recognized for it. We'll find out. I walked away before he could respond. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. From the release of years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. The following weeks were tense but productive. The partners conducted their review with professional thoroughness. They interviewed colleagues who had worked on the methodology. They traced the evolution of key concepts through documentation. They built a picture that Edmund couldn't spin or redirect. 3 colleagues came forward independently to confirm my contributions. 2 of them had witnessed Edmund presenting my ideas as his own. One had a recording of a preparation meeting where Edmund had asked me to explain the framework in detail before his client presentation. The evidence was overwhelming, not because Edmund was incompetent. He had genuine skills in relationship management and executive communication, but because the pattern of credit absorption was so consistent and so documented that denial became impossible. During this period, something unexpected happened. A competitor firm reached out to me. Whitmore Consulting was smaller than Hartwell, but growing aggressively in the operational transformation space. They had noticed my work through client referrals and industry conferences. Their managing partner, Diana Ackafer, invited me to lunch. We've been watching your methodology development, she said over salads at a restaurant near Rockefeller Center. It's exactly what our practice needs. I'm in the middle of a complicated situation at Hartwell. I know, that's part of why I'm calling. She smiled. The industry talks. Word is, your contributions haven't been properly recognized. Word travels fast. Good work gets noticed, so does good work being attributed to the wrong people. I considered her offer carefully. Whitmore was offering a director role, a salary increase of 40%, and explicit credit for methodology development. They wanted me to build their operational transformation practice from the ground up. It was everything I had wanted from Hartwell. Everything Edmund had promised and never delivered. I need to see how things resolve at my current firm first, I said. But I'm interested. Diana nodded. Take your time. The offer stands. I returned to Hartwell with new leverage and a clearer sense of my options. Whatever the partners decided, I had alternatives. My work had value in the market, even if my current firm had failed to recognize it. This gave me considerable relief. The final partners meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. Both Edmund and I were invited to present our perspectives on the director role. Edmund went first. He had prepared extensively, bringing charts and testimonials and strategic visions. He remembered to acknowledge my contributions more explicitly than before, but he still framed them as part of a collaborative partnership that he had guided and shaped. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I built the operational transformation methodology over 7 years, I said. The documentation proves this. I'm not asking for acknowledgement of collaboration. What I want is clear. I want accurate attribution of my creation. A partner named Sarah Chen leaned forward. What would you do with the director role? Scale the methodology to new markets. Train the next generation of consultants to use it properly. Ensure that contribution and credit align for everyone, not just for me. And if we choose Edmund instead? I paused, choosing my words carefully. Then, I'll wish him well and explore opportunities where my work is valued appropriately. The room understood what I wasn't saying. Whitmore had made an offer. Losing the methodology's creator would hurt the practice. Edmund spoke again. Andrea has done excellent work, but leadership requires relationship capital and institutional knowledge. Decades you've spent building on her foundation, Richard observed quietly. People were starting to look tense when Raymond raised a hand. Let's adjourn and reconvene Monday with a decision. That weekend, I walked through Central Park replaying 7 years of interactions. The pattern was obvious in retrospect. The way Edmund had isolated me from clients. The preparation meetings that extracted my knowledge. The subtle reframing of my ideas as our ideas, then his ideas. It was clear I needed to confront myself too. I had mistaken his method for mentorship because I wanted to believe in someone who believed in me. Sunday evening, a colleague texted, "Heard a rumor. A decision might have been made. Are you ready for this?" I didn't sleep that night. If they chose Edmund, I would take the Whitmore offer. If they chose me, I would lead a practice with people who had enabled his behavior. Neither option was simple, but at least I had stopped waiting for someone else to recognize my value. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully, choosing a blue blazer I had bought for important presentations, the kind Edmund had always handled for me. The irony felt appropriate. The conference room was quiet when I arrived. Richard was already seated, along with Raymond and the other senior partners. Edmund sat at the far end of the table, his posture rigid, his expression controlled. Raymond cleared his throat. "We've made our decision regarding the Client Solutions Director position." My hand stayed steady on the table, but my heart was racing. After reviewing the documentation and conducting additional interviews, we've concluded the operational transformation methodology was developed primarily by Andrea Kensington. Edmund's contributions were significant in relationship management and client acquisition, but the core intellectual property belongs to Andrea. Edmund's face didn't change, but his hands clenched beneath the table. Therefore, Raymond continued, "We are appointing Andrea as Client Solutions Director, effective immediately." The words washed over me. Director, effective immediately. 7 years of invisible work, finally recognized. "Edmund," Raymond said, turning to face him, "we're restructuring your role to focus on client relationship management. You'll retain your current title but report to Andrea on methodology-related matters." Edmund stood abruptly. "This is unacceptable." "It's our decision," Richard said calmly. "You're rewarding disloyalty. Andrea came to you behind my back instead of working through proper channels." I spoke for the first time. "I did work through proper channels for 3 years. You blocked every one of them." "That's not true. The documentation says otherwise." Edmund looked around the room, searching for allies, finding none. His voice dropped. "I gave this firm 30 years. And you'll continue to contribute," Raymond said, "but in a role that reflects accurate attribution of work." He gathered his things with shaking hands. At the door, he turned back to me. His voice was trembling with anger. "You'll regret this. Leadership is about more than spreadsheets and timestamps." "Maybe," I replied, "but it starts with honesty. Something you forgot along the way." He left without another word. The conference room was quiet for a long moment. Richard broke the silence. Congratulations, Andrea. You've earned this. Thank you. I paused. I want to make one thing clear. I'm not interested in revenge or punishment. I want to build something that works properly, where contribution and credit align for everyone. Raymond nodded. That's exactly why we chose you. I walked to my new office that afternoon. It had been Edmund's until an hour ago. His personal items were already boxed in the corner, waiting to be moved to his reduced space down the hall. I stood by the window for a long moment, looking out at the city that had witnessed my transformation from uncertain junior analyst to department director. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and relieved, and something else I couldn't quite name. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana at Whitmore. Heard the news. Congratulations. Offer still stands if you ever want to explore. I typed back. Thank you, staying for now, but I'll remember the respect you showed me. That evening, I called my sister. They gave you the job, she asked. They gave me the job. How do you feel? I looked out my window at the Manhattan skyline, at the lights coming on across thousands of windows, at all the stories unfolding in offices I would never see. I feel like I finally stopped waiting to be chosen, I said, and chose myself instead. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me too. After we hung up, I sat in my new office and let the reality settle. The methodology would now carry my name officially. The junior consultants I would lead would see a path where contribution led to recognition. Edmund still worked at the firm, diminished but present. Some relationships couldn't be repaired, only restructured, but the system had worked. The documentation had spoken. The truth had emerged. I thought about all the times I had doubted myself. Edmund's own advice about documentation had become the tool that exposed his pattern. There was irony in that, and something almost like justice. 6 months have passed since that Monday morning decision. The operational transformation practice has grown by 30% under my leadership. 3 new consultants have joined the team, and I make sure every one of them gets credit for their contributions in writing. Edmund resigned 2 months ago. He took a position at a smaller firm where his skills would be valued without the shadow of what happened at Hartwell. I heard he's doing well. I don't wish him harm. I just needed him to stop taking what wasn't his. Richard Dow became an unexpected ally and friend. He checks in regularly, not to monitor my performance, but because he genuinely wants the practice to succeed. He told me once what I did took real courage. I told him it took desperation. He laughed and said, those were often the same thing. My sister visited last month. We walked through Central Park together, past the paths I had wandered during those anxious weekends. She asked if I was happy. I told her I was something better. A version of myself who knew herself more deeply and was more confident than ever. What I learned from Edmund cost me 7 years. But it taught me something I won't forget. Loyalty has limits. Trusting someone completely doesn't mean accepting their behavior unconditionally. The moment trust becomes a tool for exploitation, it stops being loyalty and becomes surrender. Do you agree? Share your thoughts in the comments. The full Red File playlist's waiting, or discover other color files for more office revenge. See you in the next file.